Welcome to the Grazing Grass Podcast, episode 119.
Start with simple moving. Keep the cows at least moving as often as you really can.
You're listening to the Grazing Grass Podcast, sharing information and stories of grass-based livestock production utilizing regenerative practices. I'm your host, Cal Hardage. You're growing more than grass. You're growing a healthier ecosystem to help your cattle thrive in their environment. You're growing your livelihood by increasing your carrying capacity and reducing your operating costs. You're growing stronger communities and a legacy to last generations. The grazing management decisions you make today impact everything from the soil beneath your feet to the community all around you. That's why the Noble Research Institute created their Essentials of Regenerative Grazing course to teach ranchers like you easy-to-follow techniques to quickly assess your forage production and infrastructure capacity in order to begin grazing more efficiently. Together, they can help you grow not only a healthier operation, but a legacy that lasts. Learn more on their website at noble.org/grazing. It's noble.org/grazing. On today's show, we have Mike Bassett of Bassett Farms. He is a cattle and crop farmer from central Iowa. He is working on transitioning from traditional grazing to regenerative grazing. And as you work through that transition, if you're in a family enterprise, you know that the rest of the family is not always on board. Wonderful journey, wonderful sharing of information today. You'll enjoy what Mike has to say. 10 seconds about my farm. Well, I don't really have too much. My wife is teaching summer school, and she is making cookies for activity tomorrow at school. So I have to say this has been a pretty good day, and I will not tell anybody how many cookies I may or may not have eaten. 10 seconds about the podcast. We want to thank those latest Grazing Grass insiders. We appreciate your support. Also, if you haven't left us a review, I know I transitioned really quickly into that. If you haven't left us a review, we appreciate it. And as one of my favorite podcasts says, we love 5-star reviews and positive comments. Let's read one of our latest reviews. Oh yes, low input profitable grass farming ideas. This podcast is a great addition to your weekly listens if you're raising animals with grass as your centerpiece. The host does a great job of asking questions and focuses on profitable grass-based production for many classes of livestock. Thank you, Perkinstown Bowhunter. We appreciate the review. So a little bit about my farm, actually more about cookies, a little bit about the podcast. It's time to talk to Mike. Mike, we want to welcome you to the Grazing Grass Podcast. We're excited you're here today.
No, it's an honor to be here, Cal.
Thank you. To get started, tell us a little bit about yourself and your operation.
I'm a third-generation cattle crops farmer here in central Iowa and ran about 1,500 acres corn, soybeans, and we try to stay close to 300 head of cow-calf operation, split between two farms, but we're about 280 head now, plus we were a 300 head capacity feedlot operation. So most everything that we have done is conventional. We dabble in a few no-till, just done some cover crops with cattle. That's really goes hand in hand, at least.
Oh, yeah. It's always been conventional. When did you start learning about regenerative, thinking, hey, I need to do some things differently?
It was more or less when I came back from the military and I took over working the cattle side, and I'd actually always hated working the cattle. And so normal story, I hated working them, but it was more, it's not that I hated working the cattle, it's more or less I didn't figure out how I worked the cattle. So I had to learn a little more better stockmanship, getting calmed down. And this farm has been around since the 80s, and my grandfather, he started the standardized rotational grazing on one paddock that we had. So he had started rotational grazing on about a 100 acre area of pasture land, split into various paddocks. Some of it was hay ground, some of it was grazing ground, and we had also had another pasture with, we really had three pastures in the main farm. And shortly after I came back from the military, we lost one of those pastures. So we had to overload one pasture, which ended up being that rotational. I would say 5 years ago, I made a rant on Reddit. I do follow Reddit quite a bit, so I basically said every year I get more and more frustrated putting 110 head of cow-calf pairs on my 100-acre rotational pasture. Beginning of the season, we take first cutting of 60 acres, which sets me back, but we need the hay, with only one other dedicated 40-acre hayfield. I had really been complaining about overgrazing my pasture for however many years with about 100 head on 100 acres, which in normal years would work great. And one day my grandfather came up to me and goes, why don't you split one of those 10-acre paddocks in half? And I thought, I've heard of this before. It was at the time, about 5 years ago, management intensive rotational grazing. And I thought, I'm going to go ahead, take the time, learn it right, do it the right way, and figure out how I'm going to make a daily move rotation system. Which he did not like that at all, because why you gotta move them every day? That's gonna take too much time setting up all that fence. And to set something up like that, it does. And the first thing I had to figure out was to measure my forage. And I didn't know anything about measuring forage. My grandfather made me clip it to the ground. He wanted to utilize 100%. And so I got to reading it and figuring out I need to know how much they need to take out. And this wasn't even to leave any behind. This is how much area do I need for 1 day's growth, basically. And this is what a lot of the schools teach you. And I was doing this by flipping through this article or this university research paper and figuring out piece by piece. And it took me a solid month of just every time I get off work, I'd be flipping through my phone, reading, and driving my wife nuts by how much I was technically still working, but not getting paid for it.
Oh, yeah.
And I actually got into it and developed a daily move system and a forage measurement calculation, and built a spreadsheet to calculate for me by taking 50 different measurements, and gives me how many days of forage are per acre. So that's been a handy tool anyway, which I actually made another Reddit post about with examples and math, and if we really wanted to get into that one, we could. Because that's the thing I've always noticed is these articles that always told you that there's benefits of regenerative grazing. You should do regenerative grazing. Here's why. Plenty of benefits, but no article has ever told you how. And you have to find it out on your own. And at that time, I never even heard of Ranching for Profit, nor Noble Research Institute. None of these I'd ever heard of before, because we've been in conventional farming, and even Drovers and other magazines that us commercial guys would get don't have those, except for just a blip going, hey, this is something new, it's cool, You should
Oh,
try
right.
it.
Yeah.
But it took me going through, I think, University of Michigan, Nebraska, I think one from Pennsylvania, to dial in how to do a daily move system.
Mike, let's jump a little bit deeper into those daily moves because I know Facebook groups, other places, you hear that question. How much grass do I give my cows or my animals? How do I calculate it? You mentioned a spreadsheet there where you take 50 measurements. Let's talk a little bit about your process to calculate how much forage is out there and how you get to the paddock size you want for your cattle or how many days you get out. Sorry, to calculate paddock size or how many days you're going to get out of that pasture.
Yeah, so it really depends on the type of year. Like this year, I haven't even measured anything and have taken a step back and have open grazed because it's gone wild.
Yeah.
But really, if you got a good, let's say you're on a second graze and you want to know if that paddock is high enough to move them or how much you're going to need, you think it's ready, you're going to see what your average height is. So I walk around with a little basic yardstick and step out and take measurements just all up and down your paddock. I say a minimum of 50. The more measurements, the more accurate you're going to be. And I take the top of the leaf height of just whatever is around. You can pick clover, you can pick, they're going to be different varying. So I try and pick, I go, oh, that's a good spot for a height that you would average see. So if you see a bare patch that's 5 feet, go, okay, I'll measure the smallest part of that, and then I'll move on to the next part, measure something that's a little higher. And you get a good kind of an estimate of it because you take all those measurements and you get an average height out of it. So an example would be if I had 10.4 inches, there's a table I used from Iowa State that would tell you how many pounds per inch per acre a certain pasture would be. And an example on mine would be 200 pounds per inch per acre was according to this Iowa State chart. And I'll have everything posted when this broadcast airs. I'll post it in the grazing grass community.
Oh, wonderful. I think that'd be also, as you mentioned that Iowa, did you say Iowa State is where that's from?
Yes, it's a table from Iowa State University.
Most of the land grant universities have those available for your state if you're in the United States. Or I'm assuming that because OSU has one for Oklahoma that I referred to for different numbers.
Yep. But yeah, as long as you could figure out what your pounds per inch per acre is, you can, so let's say if my grass was 10 inches tall, you can multiply that by 200 and you'll get 2,000 pounds per acre of dry matter. Now these are real estimates that, I mean, really guesstimating here. And I really like the low ball. My pasture might be already 250 pounds per inch per acre. When I actually first started grazing this, I started at 150 pounds per inch per acre. And I guess in the example math here, I get back to reading here. So yeah, with the 2,000 pounds of matter, yeah, I had to flip through this because a lot of it's not in my head anymore. I let the spreadsheet do its job.
But it's a great process to go through, and because I think after you've done it a while, if you have some automated method like your spreadsheet or something, or you've done it long enough, then you're just eyeballing it.
Oh yeah, I can go eyeballing it now. But still, even if I'm going into the second rotation, I eyeball and think, hey, that looks ready. And I go out and measure it. If it's only 10 inches average, there's really no point. Yeah, I could dial it in if I absolutely needed that forage. But to know how many days is out there is actually a really good thing because, and I'll get into this a little bit further after a bit.
That calibration needs to happen every once in a while. Yeah,
and I'll talk about even calibrating the calculations because I've done that before. But when you take the total dry matter of the paddock, like Okay, so my example is 1,563 times 5 acres, which I was using the 150 pounds per inch per acre in this calculation now, goes 7,815 pounds of dry matter over 5 acres. So to figure out the decimated number of days, you need to know how much a lactating cow or dry cow or yearling is going to need for that one day. So I guesstimated my 80 cow-calf pairs would be eating 40 pounds a day. I like to overestimate that one. Underestimate your forage, overestimate how much they're going to need to eat, so you leave more. And so that equal to be 3,254 pounds a day. I took the total dry matter of the paddock, divide the dry matter requirements, and it would equal 2.4 days on the 5 acres. So doing that, I whip out my handy dandy mapping tool and map out on my paddocks 2.4, or if it's 2.4 days on 5 acres, I can split it in half. So 2.5 days here, 2.5 days there. But when you start to get into so many days in bigger paddocks, you can go, all right, I need 3 acres for this day, 3 acres for that day. And so you can map out on your mapping program 3 acres. And I do have a mapping program I really enjoy that I paid $16 for the pro version of, that just does a simple area, line, and and it's absolutely free to use for unlimited mapping, but you only get one color. So I like to color code everything.
Oh, yeah.
So that's why I paid the $16 for it, and it is really paid off.
And what is that app?
I believe it is Field Area Measure Pro is the name of it. And it's really nice, simple mapping app. I have hundreds of things mapped all over different areas. I've even mapped my neighbor's pasture. It is a simple, if I had that, what would I do for a rotation on his pasture?
Oh, yeah.
I tried to map out a rotation up on my north pasture, but that's a quagmire of a creek, a very major creek that likes to flood, and a free gravel pit system that trying to fence everything and figure out rotations and good paddock sizes is impossible, which is why I'm waiting for virtual colors to become more reliable and affordable. Yeah. But yeah, when I do the mapping, that really helps figure out which paddock sizes you can get, and along with the calculations that I did, I decided to really actually try and check myself. And the best way to check yourself and measure it is try it on a hayfield. See how many round bales you'll get. I'm estimating our round bales to be about 1,200 pounds completely dry. So I bumped it up and said, yeah, let's say our bales are 1,300 pounds. If they're just slightly damp from how you're trying to rush to get hay, you're not going to have it as dry as out of an entire 40-acre hayfield. I was off by 3 hay bales. Just by measuring before cutting and baling, I was off that far. And 3 hay bales in the grand scheme of things is not too bad. Yeah, it's 1,300 pounds per bale, but if you think about it, I was 3 bales short. So that's 3 bales left on the pasture now, basically, in my mind, for when you're doing it as a measuring system. So to me, that told me what I was doing was correct.
Right, and I can see that benefit of underutilizing your grass versus overutilizing. I'd rather leave a little bit extra out there than to take too much.
Yes, and yeah, that used to be a big argument with my grandfather too, is that, well, you're leaving too much grass out there. And through a drought year, one year I actually had a hayfield that was at my disposal because the next year we were going to turn it into crop ground. And so I was successful in turning that 36-acre hayfield. I was able to make it last like 48 days on my normal second rotation. And so I couldn't believe that, and I was doing so well this was year 2 that I had actually started a daily rotation system. And my grandfather's response out of that was, let's rip some more acres. He took that and another 40 acres.
You talked about your hay meta And you were able on the second cutting get 46 days out of that, and your grandpa decided to...
Yeah, he wanted to rip some more acres, which put me into more of a bind because little known to us, we were going to be getting into more of a drought situation.
Oh, yeah.
And luckily for us, we had some CRP ground just coming out. And the derecho happened in 2020, which completely ripped out a whole bunch of trees along this old fence line we had from what was a CRP that I had as a pasture. But the derecho actually did us a favor, because when my grandfather went through, ripped all those trees out, he also ripped the fence line with it. I figured we'd have a bigger open pasture at that point. And the next year, the 2021, I had put some cross fences in over there and turned it into a really nice daily rotational move system, hoping to regenerate that, because in the bottom area where it had been rotational open grazed, normally on a regular rotation I'd put them out for 2 weeks, but with 90 pairs I'm able to go an acre a day in good vegetative growth, or even in full mature growth, still an acre a day, but going in a third trampled, a third grazed, and a third standing.
Oh, yeah.
And just figuring those small things out, and then I tried a rule of disruption for, I remember listening to, I think that's the Understanding Ag, one of the principles.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was the principle of disruption, and tried that this year by going, I'm on my 4th year of doing this now. What if I rip the cross fences out and run it a completely different way, so that way it gives these, because everything I use for water is out of the creek. We're able to use the creek where I'm from, so I just let them have the creek, but just limit their access to less than 5 days. Oh. So they have the whole bank, but because I don't want to put in all the creek bed areas, try to keep them out as much as possible. But if I minimize the amount they're there, so what I was trying to do was split them off. This year we got probably 6 inches of rain so far this month, and haven't been able to fully utilize building that type of system. So hopefully by maybe tomorrow or the next day I'll have them all under control and back into a 1 acre section and grazing the mature grass. But I know year 2, I noticed a difference. And after he had ripped, I got less acres. I was running, last year I ran, it was a 90 pair on 80 acres of grazable ground.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't have to supplement feed, but I did. I had a bunch of old corn silage I wanted to get rid of. As they were grazing a 20 acre section, I just fed them every single day a ration of silage along with their day of grazing. And that actually extended me by 2 weeks.
Oh,
because I had a section that was a 1 acre narrow strip that couldn't have been 20 feet wide, that went like 400 feet long, and I had a rain the night before. And I'll post pictures of this later and when I post
okay.
it. But
okay.
It was just a nice muddy strip, and even it's still on my Google Images. I can still see this muddy strip from this year on my mapping program.
Oh, yes.
And I have a Reddit post that shows the comparison. I had 58 days of rest on that one section, and you couldn't even tell where that strip was. I mean, it was just nothing but hoofed down, trampled down, and it was mature grass. So it made a nice muddy mat, and then everything came back within that 58 days of rest. But it slightly been impressed with, even in drought years, how I've been able to maintain 90 pairs on 80 acres.
Oh, yeah.
By moving once a day and sticking to it. And that's what the biggest thing is, that somebody's just got to remember to stick to it, and you will see results anyway.
One thing that I have happen now here, just right outside my house, didn't plan on it, but it's been really nice to see. I kind of did drift lambing with my sheep. And I say kind of. I moved the ewes that had lambed, I left them be. And I moved the ewes that hadn't lambed yet forward. And then I just combine them with the ewes behind as they lamb. And so one area I was for what? Oh, I remember why. I had some other ewes that I just weaned some lambs on off of, and I'd use electric netting there. But on the others, I had used just poly wire, and I was afraid those ewes would jump it if I put the dry ewes in there that I didn't want in there. So one area got grazed way too short. But I thought, I'm here just for a little bit, I'm off of it. The next day, or actually it was a few days they were on that area and they grazed it too short. Then the next few rotations, I did not take it near as far down. It was just one day, I moved on. And I can walk out there today, and it's amazing the difference in growth, leaving some of that grass there versus taking it so far down, which we hear that and we know that. Take a third, trample a third, leave a third, or take half, leave half, something of that, leave some cover there. But sometimes we don't get that nice visual reminder of it. And I can walk out there, I'm like, oh yeah, look how much forage is getting produced here. And this one, I've set it back quite a while longer. I've got a lot more rest period on it.
Yeah, that's what I've been trying to do, is get more rest period in the more severely grazed areas that had been grazed that way for 10, were more or less white clover and bluegrass are about the only thing that grow, and a few weeds like horse nettle and stuff start to filter in, which I have gotten my cows to eat horse nettle. I have picture proof of that too.
Oh yes.
And that's the other thing with keeping them in a tight 1 acre paddock, is they'll eat about everything they can find. And I laughed, and the reason why I know why the forage comes back so much. And my grandfather criticized me, I think, one time because of how much it was just trampled over of the mature grass. Because every year I get too far behind, and everything goes to seed, everything's gone to head. So I got used to grazing that way. Now, what I think my saving grace is, they give them that third, and if they get that great cover of mat over the ground, and then every morning dew, that ground is getting a moisture. And then the sun comes out, dries out the dew, where it's not getting on your pants in the standing grass. But if you were to go out to where they just had been and pull that grass back, that ground is still wet.
Oh yeah, that ground is much cooler. Yes. Yeah, and to concur with that, I felt like this spring, I'm counting days. I'm thinking, how many more days do I have? Do I have to destock some? Because we went through a little bit of a dry period, not bad, but we got rain, then it dried up for just a little while, and I'm starting to get worried. And I'm like, grass not growing fast enough. I'm like, so I'm going here, how many days do I have? And then the rains hit, and it went from, and it seems like overnight, it went from I had everything in a vegetative state and to everything, all the fescue heading out. Seems to me it happened overnight. And it's just part of the battle with fescue, I think. But I see that every year, and it happens every year. And I'm like, I'm going to do better this year. And all of a sudden, I've got too mature of grass everywhere, but it still works.
Yep. As long as you don't let it go mature too much. Because I remember years back when I was looking at my pasture at the spring green up, I would compare it to the ditches. Our road ditches are full of smooth brome grass. And that stuff would always come up great. So I go, okay, why is my pasture not moving that fast? Of course, it's grazed on. I didn't know that it was being grazed too much, taking it down too far. This year, I realized, hey, my pasture's growing just as fast as my brome grass is in the pasture or in the ditches. So that was my success story there, is that I've already achieved that within 3 years on one spot anyway.
Oh, very good. Yeah.
And that was an area that hadn't had any animal impact on it for I'm guessing had to been over 50 years, because it was previously CRP, and then part of it was a crop field, which you can tell the part that's the crop field is still the hardest to get to full density. The grass is it may be tall, but it's a little sparser than just down a little ways from it. And it's amazing when you go out in the pasture and see everything that's coming back, and especially the old places that I would really overutilize, like a straight and narrow area on a bottom creek that is probably from the fence to the bank is less than 50 feet. And so either side of that, and I used to give them maybe 2 days on it until it rained one time and they had mucked it all to complete hell.
Yes.
And so I had told myself, okay, no matter what, they're either going through there and act out, or if it gets too much, they get 1 day on a dry day, they can have it. And so far, I've been finding trees come back. Little oak trees, cottonwood trees. I think I even have a black locust thorny tree that I'm going to fight to make sure nobody sprays. Because, yeah, I know everybody does not like the thorny locust, but they're a hardy survivor, and I've actually heard good things about them.
What does I can't think the author of Tree Crops. I think he's the one that says it has dappled or dappled shade. So the grass can come up through it. It's not a thick shade or heavy foliage to keep the sun out. The sun still gets there, but still provides some shade. And
nothing messes with it.
Yeah, I rent some land that was dug or mined for coal, and they went in, and because they'd removed trees, they have to put back so many trees. I could be totally wrong. I think it's a tree for each tree they remove or something. Anyway, I'm maybe wrong on that, but they'd put back a lot of honey locusts. And I remember I'd showed my dad it, and he's, you got these awful honey locusts. And they'll be okay. And because he has a different opinion than I do about them.
Yeah.
But someone else had use of it till it was fully released. And they went in and sprayed all the honey locusts and killed them. So for one, the government spent all this money. I guess the government didn't spend the money. Let me rephrase.
The
coal company spent all this money to plant those trees in because the government required them to. And then just a few years later, the person that was leasing the land from the coal company, they had some kind of agreement there so they could graze and keep Johnson grass in check. But they went in, and I'm assuming that's who did it. I could be totally wrong. But anyway, someone went in and killed all those locust trees they had just planted. I'm like, why plant them? You got to plant them because that's the government requirement for them to do. But I'm like, what?
Long-term cover crop.
Yeah.
It's kind of what we do with our rye, and we're doing our crop fields is planting it and then killing it.
Oh, yeah.
Built a root system. There you go. May help in some of it.
Yeah. You'd mentioned cover crops. Are you grazing cover crops as well?
Yeah, 2 years ago we tried a rye for the first time and baled 218 bales of it out of a 70-acre field. And I got done using those 218 bales this year. So we had already... So we put soybeans out, and then we rotated back to corn on it. And this year we put rye back out on it, which I have not baled yet, or mowed, or done anything with. And I had 2 other fields that I put into rye that I completely totally grazed one of them perfectly fine. Was able to get a kill down on it. Grazed the other one as best as I could until we had a major storm system coming that I decided my main pasture is already mature. I might as well get them out on the mature pasture in case I get a flood, because I'd rather have them out on that side of the pasture if it turns out to be a week-long event of rain, which it ended up being. So, yeah, it can get sprayed and it's got enough cover for a decent amount. And then I've got a 19-acre amount of rye that I have no idea what I'm going to do with.
Oh, yeah.
Besides maybe roll it over and do a fall perennial pasture mix into it, because I plan on turning it into a pasture anyway.
Oh, yeah.
So it gives me 19 more acres to play with, which I had planned on putting summer annuals through with, but that's, now that the rye's gone crazy, I had different plans.
Why do you use rye as the cover crop?
Mainly is because I don't know any better right now, and I guess that's what everybody said. You gotta use rye on is most common, I guess, and I've been diving deeper into it a little bit and thinking, okay, maybe I can add this as a cover crop. Maybe I should add this wherever I'm going to put cows. I'll put it more of a forage mix cover crop in. Instead of just a rye, because I'm finding out rye is really difficult to control by just cattle anyway. Unless you had less acres. I mean, I might turn to, if I do a more rye system, I might do a stocker operation or something like that, and put some of my lower performing yearlings out on rye forage mix. But I didn't have enough head to keep it under control this year,
which is a good problem. If you have too many and you don't have enough grass, that's a worse problem, as far as I'm concerned. I'd rather have too much grass than too many animals.
Yeah. Until I think was 1 year I had a rotation to where the brome went bad. And because I think it was a little bit drier, so when it went to maturity way fast, and it had its seed formed, and you could just see how thin each one of them leaves looked, and they were turning a blue green color. It does matter when you're doing, mature grass, that you get it knocked down, ate down before it gets way too late and thin and dry, because it takes even longer to get that to come back again. In my opinion, even in a 60-day rotation, I've had this one that used to be hay, used to be crop. It gets mixed into different things, but now is a permanent pasture for me. And that one, I'm finally getting it to where we'll go over 15-inch average height on a good spring. Right now, I can probably have it 20-inch in certain areas on a good vegetative state anyway.
Oh, very good. Let's talk just a little bit about your cattle. I'm all about what breed are you running. Share just a little bit about your cattle and what you're doing with them.
Yep, just a typical commercial Angus cows on Charolais bulls.
Oh, yeah.
And my family has always been a fan of the Charolais, and we've always had a market for them for the packers until I lost one packer, and we disagreed with a second packer, and I decided to go a different route. And so Charolais are now just sold on auction. So they're in around my area. They're a little difficult to sell because one of the packing plants only accepts Angus cows or black hide.
Oh, yes.
So I had to actually add Angus's onto my herd just so I like to sell on the grid for packer, and you're trying to be the big guy as a small guy in a feedlot industry there, which is a difficult game to be playing. I know a lot of guys that do this rotational grazing or regenerative grazing, they don't finish out like we do because they mostly sell feeders, and I think I was the one that first sell feeders in the family line, and I just had to because I wasn't going to sell everything on auction. I had to have a second option. I just didn't have room.
Yeah, you'd mentioned 300 head feedlot. You taking those animals through a feedlot and directly to a packer?
Yeah, my grandfather actually had built one of the first, I think, in the county or one of the first in the state. I can't remember how many head. It was like 150 head confinement building feedlot.
Oh,
Or,
yes.
yeah, manure pit confinement building, the slat pit. I think they're 38 or 36 foot by 36 foot or something like that.
So it's got a
I'll quote
slatted
it.
floor and it's
Yeah.
got the pit underneath it.
Yep, the slatted floor of pit underneath, which is finally gotten too old to be handling cattle anymore. So everybody's out in my 3-lot feedlot system that I got there. And so I split it in half. I try and keep about 100 to 150 to sell live auction at the packer close by that takes the Anguses. And I just started trying to get into some genetics program, not genetics, but my own breeding. I bought 2 of my own Charolais cows and tried to put maybe a Charolais bull on them, which failed this year because I tried to keep them as separate herds. And yesterday they all merged because my big herd decided, oh, we don't want to be here. So they went all the way up, met the other group, and decided to go through. And I've been so far behind, I haven't even gotten my bulls out except for one bull who I turned out early because he was going to be the last one in the lot after I just bought him. Because I had the rest of it, I put him in with the bred cows, and I was like, I'm going to have to kick them all out. He's going to be 5 days ahead of the other guys. What's the big deal? 15 days later, my bulls are still sitting out here in this rye field that I haven't even kicked out yet.
Things like that happen.
He was doing all the work for 70 cows, and he just had 16 more added to him.
Yeah, he's been busy.
Yeah.
I know for Charolais, I see more Charolais bulls in this area over the last, I guess, 10 years. Maybe a little shorter period of time than that, but I'm seeing a lot more Charolais around. My neighbor to the north of us, he usually runs a few Charolais bulls.
Yeah, they're a really good breed. They're pretty docile. I know a lot of people think that they might be a bit high-headed, and it's just if they don't want to do something, they're just gonna walk for you anyway. But they're really great meat-producing bulls. I mean, we look for heavy carcass weights, heavy birth weights, heavy large ribeye, and I'm trying to now just maybe mix and match and try and find a right mix of Charolais and Angus, because I was picking my Angus bulls the same way as I do Charolais, as carcass, the same carcass traits, which ribeye area is the biggest one for me anyway, and it's been pretty good at determining what would get heavy near the end of it. I try and my average weaning weights are around in the 700s, 600, 700 weaning weights, and the one pasture is with supplemental creep feed, and the other one I tried doing that, but trying to keep up with that on a daily rotation is very difficult. So this year I completely said I'm not going to do any more creep feed on that one, and I guess I'll see what happens.
And that'll be great. You'll be able to compare and contrast 2 herds and see how it does.
Yeah, and I do have a herd on a south farm that's run by another guy who's been doing managing it for, it has to be 15, 20 years now, I think, right now. And he's managing our other 150 head down there on 750 acres. But that's an open graze. Maybe he might have a few paddocks acres. I'm not actually too familiar with it because I've been too busy up here. And the rest of my family has been managing. My grandfather manages that with him and stuff on that end. I technically just work for the farm, but I was still, as a family member, working towards that goal of ultimate, hopefully owning everything.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But, yeah, it's whole operation up here is actually ran by my grandfather, who is 88, and my uncle and father, who are in their 60s. And I'm 39 years old, almost 40 now. So, a lot of age here, and we also have a hired man that has been with us for 15 years now.
Oh, yeah.
But a lot of the cattle work I've done pretty much myself. I got to the point where it's funny, it was my grandpa would go, that'll never work, or no, you'll never be able to do that. My favorite memory of that was he told me the old way was we'd have to go and get the cows up, get them in the corral, just to sort one that was off that was sick. These cows were a mile away from the corral in my rotational pasture at the farthest end I could be. And I would have to bring the whole herd up for this. Really, she was one of our wild ones. I had her marked as wild on the birthing chart.
Oh, yeah.
And we do controlled calving, so if they're crazy. We try not to have that. But
right,
her calf was sick. I thought, what if I take the truck and trailer, stick it out there? I can grab the calf, put him in the trailer. She really likes that calf. With one gate, and stand behind the door of that truck and trailer, and I waited there for a half hour before she went in the trailer. Jumped right back out as soon as that door moved.
Oh, yeah.
So I thought, okay, maybe Grandpa was right. Hell with that. I give myself 2 hours. I told him, I said, I bet you I could do it in 2 hours. It was about another hour later. She come right back up that door, went right up, and I was just too early the first time because I got that door closed, came back and showed him. Like, oh, yeah, I got him.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. Yeah. Mike, it's been an excellent conversation, but it's time for us to move on to our overgrazing section. In the overgrazing section, we take a deeper dive into some aspect of your operation, find out a little bit more there. And something you had mentioned earlier on was educating yourself about rotational grazing, regenerative practices without going to one of these schools. It seems like there's schools on every corner right now. But at the time, that wasn't the case. And oftentimes, even with the schools, you got to find time and make sure you can get there. Is it somewhere close? So let's just talk a little bit about how you educated yourself about it.
First, I'm going to give the disclaimer that I'm not saying any of these schools are bad. These schools are actually, in the complete opposite. These schools are even better than, I would say, in land-grant universities for trying to learn on how to get started and actually how to graze, because they can teach you in so much faster time than it took me to even get just the idea. And this was without social media when I was first learning, but with social media, it's been so much faster, so many more ideas to where I'm throwing out summer annuals in my sacrifice paddock when I would have never thought of it. So when I was saying about the schools is that, yes, the schools are great, but if you really don't want to try and burn the $1,500 or however much it was, or you may be just like me and some guys claiming increase your forage capacity or your stocking rate by 300% and stuff like that, then I guess start with your universities. Some of these universities have actually done some research into it. Also, look into how some of these others, I'm not a book guy. The only book I've actually listened to on grazing was Holistic Management by Alan Savory, which was good. I enjoyed that one, and it's a thinker, but
it is
not much of an instruction tool exactly, but it does make you think. But just by seeing what other people do and learning what works for you, and I guess going into the holistic management, what your context is. Everybody's context is going to be completely different. And it took me just dedication and kind of a desire to do it right, and to tell myself, I actually told myself when I first started it that I will only do this for 3 years, and if it doesn't work or it becomes too much of a headache, then I'll just go back to what I was doing.
Oh, yeah.
And I was hoping to find more pasture to just lighten the load. But now that I've done it and figuring out I'm running by however many pounds per acre stocking rates and getting into more, maybe I ought to move my paddocks north and south instead of east and west this year. Stuff like that. And then seeing the results. It's when you stick with it, try it for a year or two, you'll see a little result. by year 3, you'll see even better results. By year 3, I was already convinced by year 2, but by year 3, I started thinking even more, what can I do more of? And you have to have the drive and passion, or the at least desire to learn about it and look it up on almost a daily basis, and to keep it in mind. You're already listening to this podcast, so that as a start. And I listen to podcasts every time I get a chance. I've taken a hiatus from it lately, but I try and listen to at least your podcast, Herd Quitter podcast, a few other ones that are cattle related, and see what other people are doing in your area. And I follow Facebook now on different grazing groups, and so that's been a lot of help. So you can educate yourself into knowing how to do it. And if you don't know how to do it, there are people you can probably ask how they do it, and they will freely teach you. And biggest thing is trying to find someone in your area.
Yeah, I really think that is, because there's lots of people out there that's willing to share what they've learned, so you don't make the same mistakes. Educating yourself is a great way if you can't make it to one of those schools, or you're working at a slower pace, you can't get time off work, whatever. The schools are really good too. Now, one thing you mentioned that we don't hear often on the podcast is Reddit. So tell us, do you get a lot of information from Reddit? I'll be honest, I'm on Reddit every day, but very rarely is it regenerative ag focused. And I was sitting here thinking, as you mentioned, I thought, why haven't I used it with that focus? So share about if you're able to get information off Reddit, if it's beneficial to you.
I guess I get some news off of it. I was more looking for a community, because I was always following Reddit on, as far as like my normal social media, enjoying jokes, memes, and other fun stuff. And then I found the farming subreddit, and I've also found ranching and cattle subreddits. I think those are the main 3 that I usually follow. But you get some information, you get some back and forth dialogue. I like to answer questions that people have about that are cattle related, because I know a lot about. I actually just take an interest in the cattle themselves, their behaviors. Every time we've had the vet out, since we do deal with Iowa State University as their vet, they're a teaching school, so I might as well be a student along with them.
Yeah.
I'm paying them anyway to do a service. I might as well be letting them teach me how to do it myself, which has saved a lot of times, a lot of money. I actually had the vet go, "Hey, we haven't done our VCRP, the veterinary client relationship protocol."
Yeah.
Because I went to order meds, and they're like, "Hey, we haven't been out there in a year." I'm like, "Oh yeah, we'll call it out."
Yeah.
But I was just looking at the Reddit site. They have a regenerative ag subreddit, which has got 9,403 members. And I think a lot of it is when you look at regenerative ag, it's a different... When you see regenerative ag, it seems that it's more row crop regenerative. Or crop-related regenerative. When we're going into regenerative livestock, we're talking about regenerative grazing, which I know it's going to have a lot of different names and labels. Management intensive rotational grazing, mob grazing, regenerative grazing. I prefer to call it adaptive grazing, because you can adapt wherever you want to put them if you can put them. Like right now, I actually took a step backwards and opened my 40 acres up to the cows and said, "Have at it until I can get you under control, because things are chaotic right now."
Mike, I have to say, I think that's so important that as farmers, we're not doing this in a vacuum. We have the rest of life that we have to account for too, whether that's some other part of the farm or something else in life. I just put my cattle into a paddock they're going to stay in for I guess 4 or 5 days because we're going on vacation. So that's what I spent
Yeah.
today doing, was getting all the paddock size and getting everything moved so that they don't have to move for almost a week, because that worked for me. But that's part of that adaptiveness.
Yep.
You have to realize what's happening around you, and you have to do things that work in your context.
Yeah. And sometimes they don't work. Like even in my case right now, that's why I like to call it adaptive, is because, as I said, that I've got them out in that 40 acres open pasture right now, even though this would be the second or third week they've already been out on grazing. And it's okay, it'd be the second week they were supposed to be on that paddock. And then this last week they ended up, since Monday, they ran back up to the main sacrifice paddock, and then I pushed them finally back into where they were supposed to be. And my idea that I had before was I was going to took out all my cross fences, and I wanted to go north and south and keep them out of one specific area. The weather turned bad, and that idea went, so I ended up taking one line out. They were in a paddock for 3 days at 5 acres for 3 days, and that turned out perfectly fine. They actually stayed there until the water went down, and they went and had access to the whole pasture.
Oh, yeah.
And sadly, I had a family friend of ours. They lost the farm in a tornado, so I had to go and spend a couple days helping clean up. So I thought, I'm not going to take the time to get you guys put into a daily rotation right now. Have at it, and I'll get you under control later, which I'm hoping to do by tomorrow. But they've already had about a week or so of open grazing that, but they still haven't knocked the whole thing down, because that's when you get into selective, non-selective grazing. Selective grazing is okay for a little bit, but after a week, especially if you're trying to achieve a regenerative goal, you still at least need to have some sort of control at some point. So I know I have to have them back into 1.5 acres of daily move at some point. Otherwise, when I put them out on that 20 acres, I come back to it, I'm going to have a mix of some good, some overused grass. And
Right, yeah.
it's a game you just have to play, but it is, as long as you can keep them moving around, because I was even thinking about that. It's like, what if I start doing herd moving? Just going out, kicking, out of here, ladies, let's go over here today. And I don't have time to set up a fence. I'm just going to put you over on this corner.
I've been reading For Love of Soil by Nicole Masters, and one thing she talks about in there is range riding, or some of the ranches she worked with. And then we had Bob Kinford that was on the podcast a while back, and his instinctual migratory herding. I think that's really interesting. Most of the pastors I work with is too small to get anything done on that, but I always think that's really interesting how they do that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that there is some good stuff into that herd moving. Yeah, if you want to be a dedicated person, I guess I should have said something about where proximity and location, because that does make a big difference. I have the greatest fortune that my pasture is 1 mile away or 2 miles away.
Oh, yeah.
So that is why I can do this daily move and be so easy and quick and make it seem so effortless on my part. So I will say that's a big deal, because if I was to try and do this, my other pasture is 18 miles away, and to do a daily move on that, I would understand would be rather tedious. So even if you're an hour away, I think even a weekly move or some sort of keeping the cows moving, which I think virtual fencing technology is suddenly popping up, and that could be a whole nother topic. And I actually hope you would maybe find somebody who is using it and interview them, because I've actually went to a no fence conference. It was a Grasslands and Forage Council convention, and they had somebody from No Fence talking, and I was pretty impressed. They were close enough to getting me to want to buy at least 40 collars and put them up on that north pasture and see what happens.
I'll be honest, they are really close to getting me. I think it's no fence is the one I've looked at. I think Vince is not as accurate for smaller areas.
Not only that, but the vents, I talked to them, they're not solar. And if you were to do a smaller area, because I actually just tried to pick the brain of the sales consultant on the phone and said, let's say I decide to do it, how often would you think I would have to change the battery? She said every 3 months.
Oh yes,
Imagine hands-on cattle every 3 months.
yeah, yeah. But the great thing, that technology is just going to continue to get
Oh
better.
yeah.
It's going to get cheaper, and like you, I am just eager to try it. I can't quite justify it yet, and I've even thought about, and it doesn't even make sense then. I've just got a handful of goats. If I just used it on my goats to do some management with that, it'd give me some experience with it. But then you're working with a small number, it's hard to justify the base station and other stuff. But I'm watching very closely.
Yeah, it's exciting to see that stuff come out. And there's been other companies that just started popping up on Facebook. I see even Gallagher's got one.
Yeah, I saw something else on another company on Facebook. I don't remember who
Oh,
it was.
Halter. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
Halter's the other one. Yep.
Yeah. So interesting. It's going to be an exciting time to see how that goes and works for people. But, Mike, it is time for us to change gears. We need to transition to our famous 4 questions, sponsored by Ken Cove Farm Fence. Ken Cove Farm Fence is a proud supporter of the Grazing Grass podcasts and grazers everywhere. At Ken Cove Farm Fence, they believe there's true value within the community of grazers and land stewards. The results that follow proper management and monitoring can change the very world around us. That's why Ken Cove is dedicated to providing an ever-expanding line of grazing products to make your chores easier and your land more abundant. Whether you're growing your own food on the homestead or grazing on thousands of acres, Ken Cove has everything you need to do it well. From reels to tumblewheels, polytwine to electric nets, water valves to water troughs, you'll find what you're looking for at Ken Cove. They carry brands like Speedrite, O'Brien's, Kiwi Tech, Strainrite, Job, and more. Ken Cove is proud to be part of your regenerative journey. Call them today or visit kencove.com, and be sure to follow them on social media and subscribe to the Ken Cove YouTube channel at Ken Cove Farm Fence for helpful how-to videos and new product releases. It's the same 4 questions we ask of all of our guests. So we'll get started with our first question. What is your favorite grazing grass related book or resource?
Not, not to brag to you about your podcast, but yes, your podcast is one of them. And
Thank you.
Basically, any podcasts that are cattle related, I try and listen to.
Oh, yes.
And I've already mentioned Herd Quitter, Ranching Reboot. Yeah. Oh, I know Practically Ranching. That's the other one. CI Cattle Chat and UNI Beef Watch is another good one. I listen to a lot of podcasts while I'm working. I have a headset that I just like to listen to, and reading, like I said, Facebook and Reddit is about it. I'm not much of a book reader. I did listen to Alan Savory's Holistic Management and might get a few more audiobooks if one piques my interest, but I enjoy mostly the social media aspect of learning.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And excellent resources there. You mentioned the audiobook. I've recently started listening to audiobooks. And I really struggle with the audiobook. If I tell someone I'm reading a book, but it's an audiobook, I feel like I have to clarify while I'm listening to it.
Yeah. I'm listening
it's
to a
book.
book.
Social dynamic there.
Go old school. It's a book on tape.
There we go. Yeah. Yeah. Our second question, Mike. What is your favorite tool for the farm?
I would actually have to say my favorite tool, my number one favorite tool is my smartphone. Because as we've already discussed, I put my spreadsheet calculations in there. All my random data that I hardly ever use is in there. My mapping program's in there. My ability to reach out and listen to you is on there. And so pretty much a lot of my cattle management and a lot of stuff cattle related is in my phone.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll also post this in the Grazing Grass community, but I've also built a few other tools. I built a corner post out of like basically two pieces of channel iron, 1-inch channel iron that I put stakes in and mounted a PVC post to, like a
Oh,
PVC
yeah.
pipe, and I make it as like a corner post for my poly lines. I mainly use like those they're like the O'Brien step-in posts, the plastic ones, but
Oh,
they're
yes.
the cheaper. I get them from like Bongars or it's like Tractor Supply type. They're
Yes.
$1.49 a fence post and snap with the first time something hits it. But I've
Yes.
been switching to the Gallagher ring tops, and so I've been trying to find different tools and been getting innovative on trying to find different ways of setting them. And so I know I've shared with you before on that I actually have a tile tube that is like an 8-inch tile tube that I capped off at one end, put a strap on for my shoulder, and I can carry over 20 fence posts, those step-in fence posts with
Oh,
it.
yeah.
And I can set 400 feet of fence line, which I don't like to go over 400 feet if I don't have to, because it becomes difficult to carry that much and stepping it all out. But I could set up and tear down my normal daily moves, because I don't usually back fence. I'll let them just stair step up my
Oh, yeah.
moves, and so I'll just set a fence, take a fence, and that quiver is what I call it. My post quiver has been a lifesaver. Another one good tool is a pair of plastic pliers. They're bus fuse pulling pliers. They're meant to
Oh,
take
yes.
out they're meant to take out fuses like those little the copper fuses that out of big like shut off little industrial shut offs.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they're a complete plastic plier. And that has
Oh,
saved me
yes.
so much where if one of it comes off like your comes off your fence post somehow or the wire, you just need to touch a live wire and it just boom, makes it really nice.
Oh,
I guess the last one that's is a pretty cheap invention is my fence tester. I actually carry in my pocket most times so I don't lose it. But I all I need is to know my voltages, and that's all I it good enough for me because I know my
yeah.
fence.
And knowing your voltage is so important. It makes a big difference. It explains
Yeah.
a lot of things that happen.
Oh yes, it does. It's running 6.3. It's perfectly fine when it's normally supposed to be running 8, but 6.3 it's got a little bit of a load on it. Okay, it's 5. 5 it's too much. I gotta go clear some grass or figure out if it's just barely zapping onto a post.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Mike, our third question is, what would you tell someone just getting started?
I guess I had talked about it in the overgrazing section, but tell somebody getting started if you're like me and you're in just your conventional ag and you've been, let's say, open grazing or set stocking, close off a section. Once you feel like your one pasture is getting overused, move him into another section. Start that way. Start with simple moving. Keep the cows at least moving as often as you really can. And learn how to measure forage. And you'll eventually, once you can measure it by stick and put the math to the numbers, your head's going to do it for you by your eyeballs.
Oh, yeah.
You'll know how much is too much trample, how much is too much grazed. And then you'll start to see the results in even 2 years, but I guarantee it in 3 years almost. And I'm not the guy for somebody who comes up to me and go, I guarantee this. No, I've heard it from people who say they guarantee it. Not all say the same thing. I swear by it. I guarantee it. The third year is that magic number that the results do happen. If you don't notice the results by year 3, then you probably need to rethink the strategy and or destock.
Yes, yeah. Excellent advice there, Mike. And lastly, where can others find out more about you?
I don't do too much for not really that open. This is the most I've been opened up for a little while. But I'm on Facebook. I actually do have a Facebook group called Grazing Iowa. And I had
Oh,
this
yes.
you would be the first time I'd actually advertised it out anywhere, but
Oh, yes.
along with when this gets broadcast, I'll post a link on the grazing grass community. But
Oh,
I want to
excellent.
get,
Yeah.
along with getting people nearby, I want to find other people who are grazing nearby and get them all together so we have in the same environment, in the same context that we could figure out together.
I think that local area is so important. Grazing Iowa, I'm sitting here thinking we need a grazing Oklahoma if there's not one. I like that idea.
I mean, there's a lot of the regenerative grazing groups, and I enjoy your grazing grass community too, because I also see people cross post to regenerative grazing Facebook
I
too.
see
So
that.
I
Yeah.
get double feeds, which I don't mind. More information because people don't follow some people follow others, and
I agree. It seems like the answers are a little bit different in both cases as well.
yeah, and that's what I enjoy is see which one has the better of the comments and or which one's got
Right.
the best different comments. And no, I would like to get an Iowa group. So if anybody is from Iowa, I do have that stipulation. If you're nice about it, I'll allow within an hour border because yes, you do business in Iowa.
Oh,
But it'll be grazing related, any species. I know I just do cattle, but I know this is more species than that. But so if anybody wants to join and just request to join it, and you may be able to find me on Facebook, which I'll make a post, of course, so then you can find me because I actually looked myself up, and there are many Bassett farms on Facebook. So
oh yes.
just look for me in the grazing grass community, and I'll have a
Excellent.
post.
Wonderful. Mike, really appreciate you coming on and sharing with us today.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and have a good one.
I really hope you enjoyed today's conversation. I know I did. Thank you for listening. And if you found something useful, please share it. Share it on your social media. Tell your friends. Get the word out about the podcast. Helps us grow. If you happen to be a grass farmer and you'd like to share about your journey, go to grazinggrass.com and click on Be Our Guest. Fill out the form and I'll be in touch. We appreciate your support by sharing our episodes and telling your friends about it. You can also support our show by buying our merch. We get a little bit back from that. Another way to support the show is by becoming a Grazing Grass Insider. Grazing Grass Insiders enjoy bonus content, monthly Zooms, and discounts. You can visit the website, grazinggrass.com, click on support, and they'll have the links there. Also, if you haven't left us a review, please do. It really helps us as people are searching for podcasts. And I was just checking them, and we do not have very many reviews for 2024. So if you haven't left us a review, please do. And until next time, keep on grazing grass.